Hey cuties, I'm Lanikia and you're watching What Happened on the Soaps. This is Days of Our Lives edition. Happy Monday. Today is Monday, June the 13th, 2022. Let's get right into it. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm not going to hold you. I'm going to have to give this like I'm going to give it a 9. It was a 9 to me. It was really good. Like the parts that were really good were really good for me. And I'm going to tell you why. Sorry. Pull this up on you. My bad. Okay, so let's go. We see I'm just gonna knock these two out of the way because it wasn't much. We see Chanel and Allie together. Thank you. Chanel and Allie are together. It wasn't much to this. They told my sweet bits. And somebody had a cupcake order at the last minute, ordered 300 cupcakes, so they working to pull it together. Johnny actually had came over and got some cupcakes together to get for Susan, his grandma Susan, or whatever. And Chanel said she was so busy she really didn't get to talk to him. And Allie was like, he kept looking at you and he kept like, I said, Allie, that is your brother, and he's in love with her too. That was his wife. What are you doing? But anyways, Chanel was just like, well, he knows that I need, time to think about stuff. And she told Allie, honestly, you do too, because you was just trying to get with Trip and now you trying to get with me, but you was just wanting to be with Trip. So you really need time to think about who you want to be with as well. So then we see that they get a call from Trip and he tells them, "Can you come to the come to the hospital? I need to speak to you." And they say, "Okay, we'll come." So at the hospital, um Trip is there with Kayla and Steve, and he lets them know that he's not going to go home. He's going to actually go and spend some time with Steph and Joe and get to know his brothers and sisters and everything. Steve said that would make him happy, and Steve is sad that he won't be there with them, but he says he understands and everything, right? And then Kayla gets a call because they said there's a stabbing victim coming in, and we need you to come. So she says, I'll be back or whatever later on. So then we see Johnny, Susan, and Marlena. And Susan done invited her and Johnny over to Marlena's house so that they could she said she made gumbo. And apparently Susan cannot cook because they like, oh no, Susan, we don't want this gumbo, but we're gonna eat it. We're not gonna hurt her feelings because Susan is a sweet woman. So they're gonna eat it anyways. But Johnny tells them that he went by Sweet Bits and Chanel didn't really act like she didn't see him and whatever. And he says, Grandma, Susan, can you tell me, like, look into the future, tell me who Chanel gonna pick? So she looks into the future. She said, ooh, I see something. She said, something going on with Elvis Nim or whatever. And so then we see that, okay. So then we see that, going back to the hospital, Trip and Chanel and Allie, because they've made it to the hospital, and he lets them know he's leaving. And so when he tells them, "Okay, I'm leaving," or whatever, he and Chanel had got cool with each other. So she said, "Don't be gone too long. I hope to see you back soon." Or whatever, and then she talks to Chanel leaves so he and Allie can have some alone time. And Allie says, "You're leaving because of me, right?" And he said, "No, I'm not leaving because of you." But I mean, it's a factor in it, but that's not his whole thing for leaving. And plus, Trip is choosing himself. And I still say right on to Trip for choosing you, knowing your worth and saying, that ain't it. And moving on with your life or whatever. So so then we see that's it with like Trip and Allie. So then we go to Belle. So Belle makes it to Marlena's, and she's like, because her and Marlena had it falling out. So when she opened the door, Marlena already knows something wrong. She's like, what's going on? And she said, I have Thomas and Charlotte here. Can I come in? Can they stay here? And she was like, yes, what's going on? And she said, it's Abigail. She's been stabbed or whatever. So then that's when we go to the mansion. So at the Demira mansion, Chad goes in and he sees Abigail is stabbed and everything, and he's trying to put pressure on it. He calls the police. Well, EJ and Belle were, they was being intimate with each other and everything. So they walk in. Now, Abigail at this point is not dead. So she tells Chad, I was stabbed. They used a knife to stab me because he's calling police and everything. So she tells him, what happened. And he says, who did it? Who did it to you? But she doesn't tell him that. And then she starts telling him, I'm so cold. And he said, hang on, baby, the ambulance is coming. So when so he yells out, help. And that's when Belle and EJ, who were, they were going up to EJ's room to be intimate, they hear this and they run into the room. And he's like, I call, they were like, what's going on? And they were like, oh my God, Abigail. And so he's like, go get, I don't, she's been stabbed. Somebody got into the mansion. Go get Charlotte and Thomas. So they run off to make sure Charlotte and Thomas are safe because they don't know what's going on. So Belle gets Charlotte and Thomas and she leaves with them. And so then EJ comes back in the room with Chad and he says, what can I do? He was like, the children are safe. Belle gone to Marlena, to her mama's house with them or whatever, right? So then Chad is like, there's so much blood, and Abigail is going in and out of conscious. He telling her to hang on. And then EJ hears the ambulance. He said, I'm gonna go down and direct him to come on up here. All right. So then EJ leaves and Chad is just like, hold on, Bill. And Abigail. And she's like, I'm so cold. And that's when she slips out of conscious and she never comes back after that. And so then it's the ambulance ride and everything. And so then it's EJ and Chad at the hospital and Chad has blood all over him. And Abigail is in the ER. And um Kayla comes through and she said, Chad, are you okay? And he was like, no, it's not me. It's Abigail. Can you save her? And so she runs off to try to help Abigail. And then I guess later on, she come out because Chad is like, she'll be all right. She'll be all right or whatever. And he's just like, yeah, she's strong. And so later on, Kayla come out and you could just look at her face. And he said, no, no, no. Well, how is she? And Caleb was just like, we did everything we could, but we couldn't save her. And he was like, no, no, no. And so EJ grabs him up, from the back and he holding onto him. Y'all, that was a moment right there. Those two brothers, being brothers for each other. And EJ grabs him up and he just like, let's sit down. And he was like, no, Caleb, go get Dr. Roth. Go get him to save her. Go get And she said, there's nothing he can do. They worked on her. She said, you did your best, Chad. You did a great job in trying to stop the blood and everything. She said they worked on her for 60 minutes trying to give her CPR, the ambulance and all the people at the hospital. They said, but she said she just lost too much blood and it was too late and there was nothing we could do. So Chad is just, spiraling. Of course he's spiraling. I hate that this is happening to him, but he's spiraling. EJ is holding him, trying to, comfort him, be the brother. And so EJ was like, let's just sit down and and he says, where is she, Kayla? And she says she's in the back or whatever. And he says, I want to see her. And she says, okay. And then EJ says, I'll stay here. And he says, no, go home. Like, I just want to be alone with my wife. And EJ was like, I don't want to leave you like this. He was like, I just want to be alone with my wife. Please, just, And so EJ was like, okay, I understand. So Kayla takes Chad in the back to see her. So while Chad is seeing Abigail, the rest of the story is going along. So we see um when Belle goes to Marlena and everything, and she tells them what's going on, Johnny is like, because Susan knew before that, because Susan was, she said, oh, something going on, something ain't right. And so when Belle comes over and she tells him Abigail's been stabbed, somebody got into the mansion, Johnny was like, I gotta go to the hospital and check on my Uncle Chad. And so he leaves. And then Susan is like, whoo. And they said, what is it? And she said, I felt something. It was at the moment when Abigail had I guess had died. She had felt something. So then we see that, she's making them tea and everything. And, there's just, it's Marlena, Belle and Susan sitting down with tea. And um they say, should we call EJ? Because Belle is like, I'm not hearing from EJ and that's scaring me. And so they were like, should we call EJ? She was like, he with Chad. And she don't want to interrupt that, But then they get a knock on the door and Marlena opens the door. And as soon as she opened the door and saw EJ, she was like, oh my gosh. And then he came in and Belle stood up and she was like, she's gone, isn't he? Isn't she? And he was like, yes. And Marlena was like, and I said, you gotta act that part, Marlena. And so Susan went over there to comfort Marlena, and Belle started holding EJ, and it was just a moment, y'all. And then Chad, excuse me, and then we see Johnny is at the hospital because he before EJ had left to go and tell Bell and them, he had talked to Johnny and he was like, yeah, but he was like, how Abigail doing? And EJ told Johnny like she ain't make it. He was like, no, it's Abigail. I said the same thing, Johnny. I said they ain't gonna kill Abigail off. Like it's Abigail. Like she's a strong girl, but and he was like, no, she didn't make it or whatever. So Johnny gets upset. And EJ said, I wanted to stay. But, Chad was like, he just want to be alone. He said, so I'm going to go check on the kids. And he was like, well, I'm going to stay here just in case Uncle Chad need anything. So I'll be here, and EJ said, okay, cool. So then Chad is all, I mean, so then Johnny is all upset. He's sitting down or whatever. And Chanel, remember she was with Trip now, but she had left. So she come out and she see Johnny and she's like, he look up and she sees the tears in his eyes. And she was like, what's going on? And so he says, he tells her about Abigail. They made him tell her off screen. I said, I need all the reactions. But anyway, she was just like, I'm so sad. I'm so sorry. And so she's comforting Johnny. And so that's that. And then Kayla goes to speak to Steve, like she know he in Trip room because he had came back in and he was like, what's up, sweetheart? Sweetness. And she's like, the stabbing victim was Abigail. And he was like, okay, is she all right? She was like, no, she didn't make it. And he hugging up on Kayla and he was like, oh my God, what, Abigail? No, no, no. Because like nobody can believe this. And then so then we finally see Chad speak to he go in and see Abigail and he just can't believe it and he's talking to her and he's like, you're the love of my life, you are my life. Like we got Charlotte, we got Thomas together, but it and that was the days of our lives today, guys. I'm sorry if I missed anything. It was just an emotional, and I like the fact that it was like it wasn't like that time when Trip passed because I didn't like that. But this was more, I liked the way they did this one. So that was Days of Our Lives, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you tomorrow for another episode.